I have a message that the webinar is now streaming live on Facebook.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are here. I'm Jen Thomas, the Membership and Development Coordinator for New Hampshire Audubon, and I'm so excited to be here with my colleague Becky Suomala to do a beginning birding Q&A for you all. And we're coming to you live today on June 9th because we have about an hour and a half left of our New Hampshire Gives campaign. So if you haven't heard of New Hampshire Gives yet, it is 24 hours of Granite Staters coming together to celebrate philanthropy. There's over 550 nonprofits participating, and over $3 million has been raised for those nonprofits so far. So super excited to be one of those organizations this year for the first time. We're also so grateful. So the numbers keep on changing, but last time I checked, we were up to almost $8,000. We had $7,944 raised from 120 donors, which we could not be more thrilled for. So thank you all so much if you've already given. If you haven't given, it is not too late. So New Hampshire Gives goes until 5 p.m. today. We have a goal of getting 39 first-time donors for New Hampshire Gives, and we are up to 28. So we just need 11 more to hit that goal. And if we do, we will unlock a bonus $3,900 courtesy of our awesome board member, Betsy Janeway. So if you're tuning in and you want to help us reach that goal, head on over to newhampshiregives.org/organizations/NH Audubon. All right, so as I said, I'm here with my awesome colleague, Becky Suomala, and I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce herself to those who may not know her.
Well, hi folks, I'm Becky Suomala, and I'm a biologist here at New Hampshire Audubon. And I've been doing some Q&As during the COVID time, so some of you may know me. Happy to answer any questions you might have. I think Jen's gonna look in the Facebook to see if any questions come up. So if you've got something you're curious about, please post something and we'll try and answer those comments. We also have volunteer naturalists available, so if you're needing an answer to a question, you can email us at birdsetcetera, BIRDSETC, @NHAudubon.org. We'd be happy to help you there, or you can post a message to Facebook at any time. So thanks. And Jen, I don't know if we want to jump right in with some questions people might be thinking about right now.
Yeah, definitely. So I know I'm personally am not knowledgeable at all about birds, so I can identify, you know, some most common ones, the seagull, blue jay, cardinal. But what birds this time of year, as people head outside, what are most active in New Hampshire that folks are most likely to see?
Well, at this time of year, it is nesting season. So you've got adult birds, they're building their nests, laying their eggs, feeding young, and hopefully the youngsters are making it and they're out and they're gonna be learning to fly. So you could see any number of birds that breed here in the state. And you could also see their youngsters too. Some birds it's a little early for, but robin young are out and about, and they have that rusty color like the adults, but they have spots all over the breast, and those are the juveniles. They oftentimes leave the nest before they can fly, so you might see them hopping around your yard, and they make a very piercing squawk because the adults continue to feed them after they leave the nest, and actually for probably several weeks after they leave the nest. So the youngsters make this really loud noise to let the parents know where they are to bring food to them. And then gradually the young learn to feed themselves and then to fly and be a more successful or adult bird. So you've got your neighborhood birds around now, chickadees If you still have feeders up, most of us can't put our feeders up now because of bears, but if you are in a spot where you can put a bird feeder up, you'll still have your local chickadees coming and your nuthatches. Goldfinch are in their, the males are in their brilliant breeding plumage, all bright yellow with black caps. Yeah, they're beautiful birds to see. And then if you're out in the woods, you have the thrushes, and they have that really flute-like ethereal call. They're a wood thrush, which you may hear. They have a phrase called "eole, eole." They're actually one of our declining birds. They winter all the way down in South America, and they return here to nest. But the thrushes are calling, they're nesting, and then our warblers are here. So we've got the small songbirds, warblers that are nesting in wetlands. You might have a common yellowthroat or yellow warbler. And then up in the mountains, you'll have a whole other suite of warbler species. And then, of course, some other favorite feeder birds are rose-breasted grosbeaks with the little rosy color on their chest, that D on their chest. The Baltimore orioles, which are orange and black, and indigo buntings, which are all blue. They're the other bird that has a lot of blue on it, other than the blue jay, is the bluebird. But the bluebird has an all blue back and a rusty colored breast. And the indigo bunting, it's like it's been dipped in blue dye. The whole thing is blue, at least for the males. And then on the coast, we have things like our terns, which are back, and you might see them feeding offshore on small fish. They can be fun to see. Most of the gulls, you'll still see some, but they're off on nesting islands. So they won't be as numerous as they might be. So still lots to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And sounds like lots of vibrant colors too, between the Baltimore Orioles that you mentioned, those goldfinches. So,
well, in springtime, that's when the males look the most colorful
okay.
because they're in their breeding plumage. They are trying to attract the mate, defend the territory, and so they have their most brilliant plumage. Females tend to be less brilliant because they're usually the ones that sit on the nest and they need to blend in, they need to be less conspicuous, whereas males will be up there singing away to announce their territory and showing off how gorgeous they are and what great genes they have and what great condition they're in to have all this beautiful plumage. So it is the height of color in the bird world.
Great. So it's an awesome time to get out there. Now, one bird that I've seen recently that I don't think you mentioned, hummingbirds. So
Oh,
what kinds are around here and what do they eat? And what are there different kinds of hummingbirds, or talk to us a little bit about that?
well, in New England, unfortunately, we only have one kind of hummingbird. If you
Okay.
go west, you get a lot more. If you go south to the tropics, you have loads of different hummingbirds. But the hummingbird here is the ruby-throated hummingbird, and they breed in the area. And one of the fun things about them is the males have this bright red throat, but it's reflective feathers. So if you see it in the shade, it will look like it has a black throat. And then when the sun hits it, it turns just the right angle, it will look bright red. And that's what gives it its name. The female does not have that red throat. She's more of a whitish gray on the belly. Both of them are very green on the back. Occasionally we get a rare hummingbird like a rufous hummingbird, maybe one report a year or something like that. And usually that's in the fall. So you're unlikely to see anything other than ruby-throated hummingbirds here. But I do want to mention, before I talk about the feed, is that we oftentimes get calls from people who say, I've seen a really tiny hummingbird at my phlox or some other flower. And there's an insect called a hummingbird moth that hovers just like a hummingbird right at a flower. So it'll hover, 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 and go in after the nectar because it has a long tongue that it unfurls and sticks into the flower to get the nectar. And if you have any bee balm in your yard, they also love to come to those flowers. So
Interesting.
there are 2 or 3 different kinds of hummingbird moths. They're also called clearwing moths, because if you could see them when their wings weren't moving, which you basically never do, they're clear. The wings themselves are clear. And some of them are a little reddish color on the back, some a little green. So we have our ruby-throated hummingbirds, and the little teeny tiny hummingbirds are actually hummingbird moths. And if you want to attract hummingbirds to your yard, there are a couple of different ways.
Mhm.
The adults feed primarily on nectar. So they will come to a feeder that has a sugar solution in it. And there are special hummingbird feeders you can get. And usually they have some red on them. So hummingbirds are attracted to red. So if you have a hummingbird feeder out that has red on it, you don't need red dye in the feeder. You just need some red on the feeder and they'll investigate it. And if you want to make your own solution of nectar, you do 1 part sugar to anywhere from 4 to 8 parts of water. You want to bring it to a boil, let it cool naturally, keep it cold, put it out in small amounts. So especially with the heat wave that we've had, you don't want to put out a lot because it could go bad. So just put out a little bit and refresh it daily when it's hot temperatures like this. When we cool off, you can leave it out for a little longer. So that's a classic way to attract hummingbirds. You can also plant flowers that hummingbirds like, and there are a number of different resources for that. But basically, flowers, red flowers, flowers with kind of tubes to them that the hummingbird can stick its bill in, will be another way to attract them to your yard. I have a honeysuckle vine with red flowers on it, and they like to come to that. So there's a number of things that you can plant. One of the things hummingbirds do early in the season, they come back sort of just as flowers are starting to open, and they will actually feed at what's called sapsucker wells. We have a bird called a yellow-bellied sapsucker, and they make little holes in the tree. They'll make very even holes, like all around a trunk in parallel rows. And the sap will flow and insects will be attracted to get stuck in it. And the sapsucker will come along and feed on the sap and the insects, and the hummingbirds will come and feed on the sap as well. So early in the season, they may go for those sapsucker wells. So there are people who, when they have a sapsucker, maybe they're going for the favorite apple tree and maybe they don't want them there, but they can remember that hummingbirds may also come and feed too.
Mhm.
So that's a natural thing. The other thing is that hummingbirds feed their young insects. So even though the adults will feed on nectar, the young need insects and that protein in order to be able to grow.
Interesting. Okay. Now, you mentioned this time of year, lots of people have had to take their bird feeders inside because of the bear problem. Is it safe to have hummingbird feeders out? Are those bear proof?
Well, as far as I know, you can put a hummingbird feeder out. I don't know whether it doesn't have the smell that the bears are looking for, or by this time they're finding lots of natural food, but they don't appear to go for hummingbird feeders the way they do for things like sunflower seed feeders that have lots of protein in those sunflower seeds.
Gotcha. That makes sense. You mentioned it's nesting season. So lots of times baby birds fall out of nests. What should someone do if they find a bird on the ground, a baby bird?
Good question. Thank you. So it's easy for young birds to leave the nest before they can fly. If you think about it, the birds are in the nest, the young ones are in the nest, they're squawking, they're making lots of noise. They're really vulnerable to predators. So they may leave even before they can fly. And it's actually maybe safer for them than to continue to be in the nest making lots of noise where a predator may get to them. So they leave the nest, they may be in a bush, they may be on the ground. If they have feathers and are making noise, the best thing to do is leave them alone. The parents will come and will continue to feed them. And bird parents are the best parents for baby birds. Humans do not make good parents for birds. We can't teach them how to feed or how to escape from predators. So the bird's best chance is to stay with its parents. Now, sometimes the bird will be on the ground and maybe you'll be concerned about cats or something like that. So the best thing to do is take a box. Well, you can actually lift up the youngster and put it in a bush. That's an okay thing to do. Handle it gently. Birds actually, contrary to a wives' tale, they don't have a good sense of smell. So if you handle the bird, you only want to handle it briefly so you don't cause too much trauma, but move it up into a bush and it will be fine. Or if there's a little shelf on your garage or in your house, you can put it up on the shelf, but in a bush or someplace where it's protected is great. The other thing you can do is take something like a cardboard box and turn it on its side. So it's got an opening. You can put the bird in there so the adults can easily come in from the side. The young bird can get out, but then you can put it up off the ground somewhere. Now, if the bird doesn't have feathers, then it's clearly gotten out of the nest. Maybe a predator raided the nest. It can't survive on its own. And that's when you want to call a wildlife rehabilitator. And New Hampshire Fish and Game has a list of them on their website. And we also have a number at New Hampshire Audubon that's on our regular recording. So even if we're not here, you can get that number.
Great to know. As far as bird nests, if there's one that's not where it's supposed to be, if it's in a hanging plant maybe, or in somewhere where it just doesn't look right, what should folks do about a nest?
We get questions like this all the time. Now, bird nesting in a hanging plant, it could be fine. You know, if you're doing your normal activity, just kind of ignore the nest, you know, don't pay too much attention to it. That bird is probably used to you being around.
Okay.
Watering the plant can be a challenge.
Right.
So what I suggest, if you can bottom water it, you know, put water in the saucer, that's great. If not, just put little bits of it more frequently, bits of water more frequently.
Okay.
And so that you don't drown the nest, but you still get some, you know, the other part of the plant, water it. The nest usually isn't in the whole plant. Maybe over in a corner here, or maybe in the center, but you can get in on the edges or on the other side of the pot. Put a little bit of water in. So it should be just fine. It's much more problematical when there's a nest someplace where you kind of don't want it to be. So there are a couple of classic examples. One is a nest right over the doorway, and every time you go out, the bird flies.
Yes, we have that right now. Yeah, a robin's nest right under our deck, right by the door.
Yep. But that's okay. If you do your normal activity, you'll be all right.
Okay.
Don't stop and stare at her every time you're going by. Just pretend, oh, I don't know you're there. I'm just going by. You know, she'll be fine because she probably nested there even while you were doing that.
Okay.
So she's got it down. She's okay. But we had a situation, and this happens to a number of people. They've got a bird nest either maybe on the deck and the deck's about to be replaced. Or at Audubon, we had a nest in one of our canoes on the canoe rack, and it was time for camp and they needed the canoes. So what do? Well, one of the things you can't do is just move the nest. Even if the bird is staring and watching you as you move it, they will not go to the new place. They will go back right to where it was because they're keyed in on an actual location. So it gets tricky. We were able to successfully manage the nest in the canoes by first putting the nest in a cardboard box. I think it had maybe 3 sides and a bottom, you know, so we could put the cardboard nest right where the nest had been with the nest in the cardboard box. Leave it there for a day so she comes and gets used to it.
Yep.
Then we moved it onto a ladder that was just, squeaked up underneath the canoes so that it was still in the same place, but no longer on the canoes, and leave that for a day.
Mm-hmm.
Then gradually move it, maybe a foot, leave it for a day, another foot, leave it for the day. Over the course of, I think it was 4 to 5 days, we got her far enough away so we could take the trailer away, and she returned to the nest sitting out in the parking lot on top of the stepladder in the box. So it can work. It's not ideal, but that's the process you need to do that. And I've done it also with gull nests. There was
Okay.
one that was right where a float was about to be dragged out. So put a board under the nest with the nest on top, left it alone. Next day, come back, pull the board a foot. Make sure that maybe there are a couple of identifiable rocks right
Yep.
by. So, okay, they go back to the same location, they're keying in on those rocks.
Mm-hmm.
Move it another foot, move it another foot, eventually got it far enough away so the float could be dragged out. So you can do it, but take some patience.
Yeah, I was going to say, so patience seems like the key there, and to save old cardboard boxes, which I'm sure if you're anything like me during COVID, Amazon was frequently delivering stuff to your house, so we have plenty of those lying around. Good
Yeah.
to know.
Yeah, you have to keep a couple of boxes around in case of a wild animal, bird, or other type of event.
Yes, definitely. Folks, if you're just tuning in, just want to remind you all, as we're approaching the 4 o'clock hour, it's your last chance to have your donation doubled for New Hampshire Gives. So if you log on to NHGives.org, you can search right at the top for New Hampshire Audubon, and right at 4 o'clock, you can have your donation doubled. So last chance to do that. So Becky, you mentioned injured birds. I know this time of year, especially this past weekend, everyone on my social media feed was posting about turtles. So what happens if we come across a turtle or another injured animal? Should we move it? Should we leave it alone? Should we call that wildlife the New Hampshire Fish and Game that you mentioned? Especially with turtles, I know sometimes they could be close to a road, so it might seem safer to move them. What's your advice about turtles and other wildlife?
It really depends on the situation. So if this is the time of year when turtles are laying their eggs, and the females leave the wetlands to find a sandy bank area where they can dig and lay their eggs. Gardens also are a great spot that turtles will lay eggs in because nice soft dirt. But they can't lay it right at the wetland, so they need to travel, and that sometimes brings them across roads. And the females will oftentimes return to the same place to nest each year. And crossing the road is a very dangerous time. So if the turtle is not hurt, but is just in the road, the best thing to do is to bring it in the direction the turtle was going. So the wetland may be on one side and it may have been going away from the wetland, and you may think, oh, I better bring it back to the pond. Nope,
Right.
don't do that because she's headed to a nesting area.
Okay.
So if he was crossing the road, bring her across the road in the direction she was going and let her, move on her way. I usually bring them 3 or 4 feet into the either woods or grass or whatever's on the side of the road so that she's off the road. If it's an injured turtle, then it does need to go to a wildlife rehabilitator. And that's when you want to look at that list in New Hampshire Fish and Game or give us a call and get a number of somebody. Because the turtle may be able to heal or it may need help healing, and somebody needs to evaluate that. And that's true for things like, hawks sometimes get hit on the side of the road. Sometimes owls get hit going down for rodents that might be crossing the road. And if you have an injured bird like that, wildlife rehabilitator is key. And they, you have to be licensed to be a wildlife rehabilitator. You don't want to try and care for it yourself at home. You want to be under the guidance, either get it to a wildlife rehabilitator or be under the guidance of a wildlife rehabilitator. Because, for example, with something like a raptor, you can't feed them hamburger we would eat. It has too much fat in it. It won't work. And that's about as much knowledge as I have of wildlife rehabilitation. So you definitely want to get to somebody who knows what they're doing.
Okay, good advice. Folks, if you're just tuning in to Facebook and you have any questions for Becky, feel free to leave a comment. We did prepare some previously just questions that Becky's gotten frequently, and this next one, I actually was wondering about this because this happened at our house last week. So we had a bird flying into our windows and then pecking at our sidecar mirrors. We tried folding the mirrors in, tried covering with newspaper. What are birds doing? Are they seeing their own reflection and trying to, what are they, it was just acting crazy. We think it was a sparrow, but not entirely sure.
Yeah. Well, it's springtime and males are defending their territories from intruders. And so most birds have a particular territory, not all birds, but most birds. Um, and there's a male and a female in that territory. And so the male wants to, it won't mind if there's more than one female around, but it definitely doesn't want another male around. And sometimes the females will chase other females away. So when they see their reflection in either a window or a mirror, they try and drive that intruder away. They have no knowledge that it's their own reflection. So they'll flutter at it, they'll peck at it, and they can go crazy. I did have one person call one time describing this behavior and thinking that it was his mother-in-law come back to haunt him. but it's not. It's normal behavior. But they also get stuck on it. Like once they realize that's where they can find their rival, they will keep going back over and over again.
Yes.
And the only thing you can do is cover over the surface so it's not reflective.
Okay.
I'm surprised your newspaper didn't work because that's one of the things you can do is tape up newspaper temporarily. There's that fake snow stuff called glass wax.
Okay.
You can spray that on, and anything, but whatever you do has to be the outside surface of the window. It doesn't work on the inside. That doesn't do anything for the reflection. They're not seeing through the window. They're seeing the outside surface of the window. So that's what you have to do. And sometimes they are just so persistent. Screens will sometimes deter them. But if they've already got fixated on it, they still seem to see through the screens.
So I have so many questions about this. Do they injure themselves when they repeatedly peck and fly into things?
They don't appear to, as best as we can tell. They certainly expend a lot of useless energy. And the behavior does tend to taper off when they're young ones to feed. It's busy feeding youngsters. It usually is not happening in the wintertime. So it's usually just this intense breeding time.
Interesting. And how big for like a bird like a sparrow, say, how big would its territory be?
Oh, that's really variable. It's variable by species and it's variable by the quality of the habitat.
Interesting.
So if it's really good habitat, birds can have smaller territories and survive. If it's poor quality habitat, they need bigger territories. And the quality of the habitat will depend on the species.
Okay.
So what's good quality habitat for a robin is not good quality habitat for something like a Baltimore oriole, not necessarily. They're feeding on different things, they're utilizing different parts of the habitat, different plants, etc.
Interesting. So as I mentioned, I am a complete birding newbie. I visited Panema Bog last week and had my phone out the whole time. I was using the Seek app to identify some plants and flowers, and I think the BirdNet app to record bird sounds. but what resources as far as apps or books or websites would you recommend for birders just starting out?
Well, the first thing I recommend is a pair of binoculars, just because it really helps you to see the bird better. You can bring it up closer and be able to look at more of the features of the bird. So if somebody's just getting started, the first two things I recommend are binoculars and a field guide. Now, of course, I'm the paper field guide type of birder. That's what I learned with, and there are a number of different ones. But the one I tend to recommend for beginning birders in um, New Hampshire is a Peterson Field Guide to Eastern Birds, and that it introduces you to the system where you identify field marks, like look for certain things. It points out with arrows the certain things you want to pay attention to try and identify the bird. And you're not looking at all the Western species that usually aren't here. But paper field guides are great. There's an app called the Merlin app. Merlin is a bird, it's a small falcon. And that is also a great tool for bird identification. They continue to work on refining it, getting it better. You enter certain things about what you've seen, where you are, the colors, size, etc. And then it will bring back several choices for you and photos of those choices. And that's probably one of the top apps right now for birding identification. And then, of course, the paper field guides are also available for your phone. So you can get those, and some of them will allow you to actually compare a couple of different species right on your phone.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I'm definitely going to check out that Merlin app for next time I go out. That sounds good.
Yeah, I think that you would like it. A lot of people do like it and find it very useful.
Okay. Awesome. And our nature store is open, so I'm sure people can grab some of the items you mentioned from there, binoculars especially.
Binoculars and field guides. Michelle usually stocks some good field guides there. So that's a good place to look and check things out.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, our McLean Center Nature Store is back open to the public. We opened last week. So our hours are Tuesday through Friday. Becky's at 11 to 4. Is that right?
Yeah.
11 to 4, Tuesday through Friday. So feel free to come down to Concord and check it out. So like I said, I went to Panema Bog last week. I recently visited Deering Sanctuary and our colleague Diane. And lots of birds at both places, but where do you suggest folks go to look for birds, especially maybe some rarer ones if people want to see a bald eagle or something? Are there any special spots in the state that are known for great birding?
There are some spots known for great birding, but I will say at this time of year, you can go just about anywhere and see some great birds, like your experience at Panema Bog. You could go to them at the McLean Center here in Concord. We have trails down to the pond. There are always birds singing, always birds around. It's not like wintertime where things can be really quiet some places. Right now, it's busy everywhere. So you can see birds wherever you go. If you're looking for sort of some of the unusual birds, the most likely place to see them is at the New Hampshire seacoast.
Okay.
And one of the places folks like to go there is Odiorn Point State Park. That can be an excellent place to look for birds, and you get a view on the ocean, so you can look for some of our ocean birds. And then up north is the Pondicherry Wildlife Refuge. That's New Hampshire Audubon's part of the partnership of ownership up there. And that can be a great place to look for some of the northern warblers, some of the species you might expect up in that area. And then for things like, say, bald eagles and osprey, they're now scattered around the state. So it's just, both of those species are usually nesting on or near the water. So the best places to look for them are along our major rivers and lakes and at the New Hampshire coast. It just kind of depends on being near a nest. They're getting to the point where they're feeding youngsters, so you can see birds flying a lot more. When small birds, and actually bigger birds too, when they're incubating, they tend to be very quiet, much more secretive. And then when the young hatch, they have to feed them, so they're much more active. And then when the young start to fledge and move around, then everybody's busy bouncing around looking for things.
Interesting. And you were at the mall in Concord the other day, so I logged onto our YouTube channel and not expecting to see Becky in the parking lot of the mall looking for birds. Can you tell everyone a little bit about what you were doing?
I'd be happy to. That's one of the things that I do is study a bird called the common nighthawk. And it is not common. It is endangered in the state. It is a bird of the open plains in the Midwest, but we do have birds in the East. And they used to nest on gravel rooftops. And a few of them still do, including at the Steeplegate Mall in Concord, New Hampshire. And there's a big, huge stone roof there, and there are nighthawks present in the summertime there. And what I try and do is monitor for these birds throughout the state to try and determine where they may be nesting and if they're at all successful. So nighthawks are not hawks either. They feed on insects. They're one of our aerial insectivores, which means they feed on insects while they're on the wing. So they're flying around eating insects. And that whole group of birds is declining. Swallows is another bird that's an aerial insectivore. Our flycatchers are aerial insectivores. And whippoorwills are another aerial insectivore. And the nighthawk is related to a whippoorwill. And it's active in the crepuscular hours. So there's your new word for the day is crepuscular.
Okay.
And that's dawn and dusk.
Okay.
So I go out looking for the nighthawks, usually from 8 to 9:30 or 3:30 in the morning until 5. Usually I'm out in the evening watching for them and listening for them. And the males in particular have a really unique display that they do over a potential nest site. What they do is they circle high overhead. They do a little flap, 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 soar, flap, 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 soar, and they peep, 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 peep. And then all of a sudden they do a dive and they go whoosh, down and back up again. So I'm looking for that when I'm out there trying to see if maybe we've got potential nest sites. It doesn't mean that there's a nest when they do that, but it means there's a possible nest.
Okay.
The females are very sneaky. They're hard to spot. So we're usually looking for them to see if maybe there's a pair instead of just a male. But another place where you can hear nighthawks is in Keene, New Hampshire.
Okay.
And they used to be in maybe 26 different towns in New Hampshire, and again nesting on those flat gravel rooftops. Now they're only in 2 towns, and a lot of the gravel rooftops have reverted to rubber, but we don't think that's the reason they're no longer in the cities. Their population is declining even in the Midwest where they're common. So that appears to be a decline that is likely related to insects, but they migrate all the way down to South America. So it could be related to pesticide use, could be related to habitat change because they like big open areas, could be habitat change in migration, habitat change on the wintering grounds. Studying them and working on their conservation is very complex, and we just don't know what's happening to them yet.
So I grew up in Rhode Island. My grandmother loved birds. She had a bird feeder right outside her window. Bears were not an issue, and so she kept the bird feeder out year round. So in New Hampshire, obviously, we're not as lucky. So for folks who have had to take their bird feeder in, and I know you were just mentioning some bird species that are declining, what can folks do to help birds, especially this time of year? We have just, like I said, so many generous supporters of New Hampshire Audubon who want to either support us financially through NHGives or just in general and are interested in education. So for those folks tuning in, what advice would you give them on how to best help our birds this time of year?
First and foremost, keep your cats indoors. Cats kill millions of birds each year, and keeping them indoors is a simple solution. It's better for the cat and better for the birds. That's one of the, probably, other than habitat loss, that's probably the second biggest risk to birds. And that is coming from the New Hampshire State of the Birds report that New Hampshire Audubon produced quite recently. It's available on the New Hampshire Audubon website. And there's actually sort of top 10 things that you can do to help birds there. But that's one of the top ones. Another is to drink bird-friendly coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So our birds that migrate down to Central and South America, which are some of the birds we absolutely love, like the Baltimore Oriole and the Scarlet Tanager and the Rose-breasted Grosbeak, they need habitat down in the wintering grounds as well. And coffee was traditionally grown in shade, and it would be a complex enough stand of vegetation that it could support lots of different bird species, including the ones that we love.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a conversion to sun coffee, sun-grown coffee. So all the forest is cut down, all that's planted is coffee, it's out in the sun, and it is not a habitat that our migrants can use. But there is bird-friendly coffee. It's certified by the Smithsonian Institution, and we sell it in our nature store here in Concord. And that certification ensures that the habitat where the coffee is grown can support birds like our migrants. So that's another thing people can do. And then third one, windows. Birds bonk into windows. These aren't the birds that are flying and pecking at the window, seeing their reflection. They're birds that hit the window and either are stunned and killed because they see a reflection of trees, sky, and they think they're flying into the windows. Into the habitat, and they're hitting the window. And there are things you can do to put on the outside surface of the window to break the reflections. We have some examples in that State of the Birds report. And if you're doing any new construction, there is bird-friendly glass that's being produced. So thinking about that when you're doing any kind of renovations could really help our birds. And if you're involved in any kind of companies that are doing construction, making them aware about glass issues for birds, hopefully before the construction starts, can be really helpful in the type of design that's used. And there is a whole bird-friendly buildings program that helps with those kind of questions on building design. So that's just a few, but check the State of the Birds, and there's a lot more that you can do.
Yeah, and those all seem like just really simple things that people can do every day to help. You mentioned the coffee, and just want to give everyone a plug. I had never heard of shade-grown coffee before, and we were having a meeting the other day about our planning for our annual meeting, and it was brought up we should totally serve that coffee, which we are going to be doing. So if you're tuning in, be sure to mark the date for September 18th for our annual meeting where you can enjoy a cup of bird-friendly shade-grown coffee.
All right, excellent. That's great.
So Becky, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm not seeing any questions come in on Facebook right now, but you had mentioned that there's a team of volunteer naturalists here at New Hampshire Audubon who can answer questions. Can you just remind everyone what that email address is?
Yes, if you have a question, you can email birds, etc., BIRDSETC at NHAudubon.org. Or you can post a message on Facebook at any time, and we have folks that will take a look and answer questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Becky. And as we're wrapping up, we have less than 40 minutes to go until New Hampshire Gives is officially over for this year. And as a reminder, last time I checked, like I said, the number, I've been refreshing the page, I think probably at least 1,000 times since it kicked off last night. But we're up to almost $8,000 and 120 donors, which we're so grateful for, but there's still a little bit of time left to give. We're still trying to reach that goal of 39 first-time donors to New Hampshire Audubon. So if you're tuning in, head on over to newhampshiregives.org. You can search for New Hampshire Audubon right at the top of that website and help us unlock a bonus $3,900. Thanks so much again, Becky, and thank you everyone for tuning in this afternoon.
Thank you, Jen. It's been great. Lots of fun.